Monthly Town Hall, Concrete 5 times. It is April 7th, 2020, and this is a particularly exciting town hall. We've got some news and some tidbits, and we're going to talk a bit about stuff that's happening in the core. But we also are awarding the contest winners for our big questionnaire that ran a month ago. So exciting stuff. Before we get into that, I won't drag it out too long, but did want to do a quick check-in on some of the version 9 progress that we're making. I don't know if we're looking at my screen or not, Corvin, but right here we have a cool Kanban board of tasks that are happening with the version 9 interface updates. Very cool. I mean, you can see stuff is in progress. I get one of these to go full screen. We are making lots of UI updates, and people are helping, and it's all going quickly. We're moving things from the left to the right, and that is pretty cool. So if you are locked in quarantine like the rest of us, and you're just looking for something to do, just so bored and tired of learning the banjo and what other things you've decided to take on, we could really use your help in here. A bunch of stuff that needs to happen. Still some creative things in there. A lot of it is just brute force, pretty well-defined work that we could just use some extra hands on. So if you've got a minute, Andy's updating cards as we go.
I know. Haven't even looked at this since we've been so busy in Slack. It's crazy.
So active. Awesome.
Yes.
So thank you for everybody who is helping in there. And if you have a minute and looking for something to do, we would really appreciate your help. That being said, let's talk about our exciting questionnaire. So we sent out this questionnaire really 2 months ago, I guess, and we had it out for the entire month of February. It was a long questionnaire. So I want to start by thanking everybody who made it through the 5 pages of questions that we came up with. I think next time we do one of these, we'll do a little bit more pruning before we send it out, because it was definitely a journey. So I appreciate everybody who took the time to give us thoughtful answers. And there were some very clear answers that I don't think they were particularly surprising to us, but strong takeaways that around some of the things that we were doing right, and some of the things that we really, it would be good if we improved on. So spending more attention on the community site, which we've been talking about for a while now. Also, just the value of the marketplace and spending more time getting great stuff into the marketplace is really important to the vast majority of you. We found a lot of answers that we really liked, and we're really appreciative of it. What we did in order to pick winners is we went through each and every row, we categorized them and gave them points for any number of different factors. So if you answered every question, you got some points. We've got a whole bunch of different elements like that we had different people go through and add up. That gave us kind of like a basic ranking. And then we sent everybody through to pick the most helpful responses. We weren't just looking for kind of a pat on the back. We were looking for some pretty nuanced feedback and actionable items that we could work on. So we got about 500 responses, which is tremendous. And out of all of those, we've picked some winners here, which I'm about to tell you. We're actually going to have a few extra winners, I think, because the responses were so big. So we're going to have a few, throw some other people in there. But number one, the most thorough answer and an absolute leader in our community, Glenn Jenkins from CatalystNet over in the UK. You are our number one submission. So we have an iPad that I can't reach, and I probably shouldn't touch because of Rona times anyways. But we'll wipe that down and put it in a box and send it off to you. Thank you very much. I never opened it. It's totally safe. It's in a cardboard box. Good job. In second place, Simon Chilton, also in the UK. That is $250 in marketplace credits and a bunch of swag, again, when we are allowed to go into our office and touch things. So the swag will come when the swag comes, but we'll get the iPad out the door as soon as possible. In third place with $100 marketplace credit and also a bunch of swag, Jamie Johnson from Pixo Web Design. We met Jamie maybe a decade ago when he was out in Portland at one point. Runs a nice concrete5 shop and also had very thorough replies. All these people had thorough replies and everyone was very helpful. Those are the three kind of top prizes that we talked about when we launched the thing. We got so many good replies that we wanted to award a few extras. So $50 in marketplace credit and a bunch of swag to places 4, 5, 6, and 7, which would be Andy Rees, creative director at Lime Green Tangerine, Scott Sandbacon or Bakken, probably Bakken, at Copperleaf Digital, Tim McNally at TM Designs, and Eric Bellevue. Bellevue? Bellevue. I'm gonna go with that. At wildapple.co. So those are our winners. Thank you everybody who submitted the form. Tremendously helpful. Has given us the data that we need to invest our time and money on pivoting back towards the community and building the marketplace and hosting platform that we've all been daydreaming of. So very exciting, and probably will expect to do another one of these in the not too distant future. This questionnaire is very much focused around DevOps and hosting and kind of how do you run your websites. I think the next time we do one of these, we'll be asking a bunch more questions around services and kind of how do you sell projects and you know, kind of feeding the process of building out our partner network. So thank you. There you go. That makes sense? Did I cover everything?
Yeah.
We're good there? Wrap that up? Right? Yeah. Cool. I guess that segues well to call outs, thank yous, and etc. Since we're in the thanking you mood. I'll bring up the Karma leaderboard here and see if I can move that onto the correct screen. Scoop. So, scoop. If you didn't know, we have a karma system where you get points the community for doing things. And you can only expect this to improve as we rebuild the community site. Right now, it looks like the web makers, KG, Sigmarigen, and Linuxoid have won add-ons for their contributions in helping people promoting the project and doing the work. Every week, add-ons get awarded to the someone kind of randomly in the top set of each of these categories, and you can do different stuff to win these points. So go explore your My Account area. It's a little buried, but you can get into there and yeah, you can kind of see these are what this is what is happening, the live feed of the activity in the community. So look at that, past certification. So still going strong. Yeah. So thank you very much to everybody who is helping in every capacity. We really appreciate it. And awesome. It's really cool to be see so many people getting stuff out of it and putting stuff into it. Do we have some stuff from GitHub that we want to talk about at all, Andy?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely next town hall we will have a whole host of things to go over. We kind of started that whole effort right as this sort of cycle was wrapping up, but we've got a ton of we've got a lot of things in GitHub, kind of from the core team getting things ready for version 9. So there's some pull requests from myself and from Corvin Santo. We've got pull requests also approved from Biplub, M. Locati, and Oles Green. And then, yeah, I expect we'll have a lot to talk about this time around in May. So that's nice. Yeah, that's about what we got to who we have to thank for this month.
Nice. We also have some submissions in the documentation stuff since we relaunched the doc site a month or two ago. Looks like Lemon Brain, the Northman. Is that Biplub as well? Just a different handle, or is that? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Jessica Dunbar, someone named Corvin, someone named Andy. I don't know. But it looks like the docs are growing, and that is lovely. We actually had someone submit a page in Spanish, which is awesome. We need to do a little bit of work so the docs can be multilingual and multi-version powered. So we rolled that back, but we will be accepting multilingual docs before too long as we figure out how to kind of tackle that. So yeah, pretty cool. Forging right along in our agenda today, showcase site. So I don't know if we're looking at my screen again, Corbin, hopefully.
Yep, we can see it.
A timely one suggested by Mr. Mike Larson here. Paraxel is a longtime concrete site that has gone through a few different design iterations. They are in the medical field. They do testing and research and that kind of thing. So pretty cool looking website. A huge mega menu, does some slidey stuff, and bunch of stuff looking pretty sexy. You can, where are we going? Yeah, you can customize your subscription preferences. So, there's some kind of personalization and your GDPR info. Pretty attractive site, doing pretty cool stuff, helping the world in a time where we could all use a little helping hand. So thought this would be a good one to kind of bring to the fore because, a huge medical organization choosing concrete5 as a safe platform that is also easy to use. So they can keep things, they can quickly update this and have timely messaging around things that are happening in real time. So yeah, pretty cool.
Oh,
if you're
I really like those buttons.
Which buttons are those?
Yeah, they have powerful, powerful button animations.
Just makes you want to click them.
Yeah, it's a nice looking site.
Yeah, well, featured content. Ooh, here we go.
Oh man,
some white papers and whatnot. Oh hell yeah! All right, cool. So there's another one for when you are dealing with a larger client. It's just like, well, give me some huge biotech company that uses your platform. Well, Ellen Paraxel uses it. Close that deal. Cool. Let's see. I think this is going to be a. Well, we'll see how detailed that you get, Andy.
I think I'm going to try my best to keep it nimble. All right, we'll see how it goes.
Well, we're gonna see if this is a pretty nimble show and tell. I'm working from my living room, which has become a call center for my family, which is now schooling from home. So, and I think Andy is in even more trying times in his basement.
A 2-year-old and a 6-year-old galloping around upstairs. It's like, oh yes.
Apologize if anarchy happens behind us, but we're going to forge right ahead. Show and tell today. We're going to talk about Bedrock. So we've I'll give you a quick intro and then I'll step back and let you do your thing, Andy. We've been talking for a while about like when we first started with concrete way back in the day. We were building pixel perfect websites for agencies, and the design always started in Photoshop from a blank slate. There was no such thing as any grid frameworks. It was really whatever the designer says goes, and you better make it match. We would take screenshots of the website we had built and their comps and do a 50% fade and say, look, it's perfect. In that kind of environment, what you want is the least overhead that you can get, so you can just swap out your lorem ipsum with a block area and have an editable site. This was, 15 years ago. Over time, web production has changed. Now we all know and love grid frameworks, and we talk about atomic design and kind of thinking from the bottom up, and things have become much more modular. The idea that I might want to add a stripe of content from here over there, and that is all fantastic. The underlying approach in concrete5, because we try to be so kind of framework agnostic and just kind of your theme dictates everything, it kind of limits some of the flexibility that we might be able to bring into the fold if we were a little more strongly opinionated in terms of a kind of a default design framework. So we decided, I don't know, maybe half a year ago, that we could do some cooler stuff if we kind of assumed that there was a consistent grid framework in your concrete5 theme, and why we would always provide some pathway to someone who is really making a bespoke site and just, I'm going to do it all in tables. I just want to put a block area here. Like, that should always be possible. But we were going to start to make that kind of the exception and not the rule. And instead, we were going to have a stronger foundational framework theme that different developers could extend, and that would make add-ons more portable, and theme development perhaps, I don't know, maybe a little easier once you learned how it worked. So I guess with that context, I will hand it over to you, Andy, to explain a little bit what you're talking about with Bedrock.
Sure, sounds good. And then we may have to tweak it a little bit, as I'm not sure how well some of this stuff is going to show up when I share my screen. You know how code does. But we'll do our best. So let's share our screen. It is easier with two monitors, but I do not have that. So we're going to do the entire screen, and we're going to just put this away. All right. So just a little bit of background on Bedrock, and I'll put it up the latest version 9 version of concrete5 while I talk about this. Everything Franz said, basically Bedrock is a superset of Bootstrap 4. So that's the first big change that's coming in version 9, is the core themes and the core assets for the things like the toolbar and the dashboard, etc. Those are built off Bootstrap 4, which means some of this cleanup that we're doing in GitHub is, kind of less glamorous, just changing Bootstrap classes that may have changed around over time. And really, there were a couple different goals in defining this asset Bedrock. The first one was to make it easier to build concrete5 themes. So like Franz said, we had it so that you can really, and this is really unchanged, concrete5 themes are still structured in the same way. But if you want to opt into our asset approach, which means building your theme based off of Bootstrap 4 and some customizations, then you will automatically get access to nice looking components, because we know those components will work well with the core. So you may have seen us talk about boards and containers and things like that. The real goal with a lot of that stuff is to be able to offer those components by themselves through the marketplace in such a way that you could potentially get a whole bunch of templates for containers that looked cool and formatted your forms a different way, etc. And then knowing that if your theme is built on the concrete5 Bedrock, it will just display nicely. And the truth about this is we've kind of done this a little bit already. Like, you'll notice in version 8 and earlier, some of the core block view templates have Bootstrap classes in them. Like, they have, BTN button classes, etc. Like, if we've sort of flirted with this a little bit already, but we've just never made it very obvious to developers how to deal with that. So this is a long time coming. Additionally, we wanted Bedrock will allow us to improve performance, because basically once we implement this, we're going to be getting rid of a whole bunch of Vue.js and Vue CSS files that come with blocks. So blocks can still include their own CSS and style sheets, as they have for many, many years. It's just the core won't use that, because the core will be including that stuff from within different themes. And then finally, we wanted to add flexibility. So as concrete5 has added more and more rich components, it's become harder and harder to deal with them. So a good example for this, which I would show you, except my local install is broken from version 9 development. We've got this calendar block. When we added the calendar in version 8, we had to add a lot of pretty opinionated JavaScript and styling in order to make the calendar do anything. It has to, it's got to show a date view. You got a page backward and forward with all these labels and stuff. And we used a library called Full Calendar, which is great. And that is included, really tied in tightly to the calendar block that you put on a page, which is fine. And that is great, because it means the calendar will work on every single site that it means the calendar is going to work on every single site where you put the block. But unfortunately, if a theme developer says, hey, I've got a great calendar component that looks awesome with my theme and I want to use that instead, there's really no way for them to do it other than just making a special calendar block in their theme package and then telling users, hey, don't use the core calendar block, use, my fancy calendar block. And that's, that is a solution that works, but it is not is far from graceful. So that was the third goal of the Bedrock, of this Bedrock project. So what is Bedrock? If you've done any core development, you know that in version 8 and below, all of the concrete5 CSS or less files and JavaScript is within this build directory. And hopefully you can see it. It's over here on the left-hand side of my screen. And I wish I could zoom in, but I cannot. And so that was all built with the core. And so if you wanted to, and just kind of existed as it was, and we shipped our stuff like jQuery, jQuery UI, all within the core. Unfortunately, and so that meant we included a version of Bootstrap 3, just kind of with the core package. But if you're building your own theme, there was no really easy way for you to include those assets in your theme. You could include the core versions of the assets, but then you were super locked into whatever the core happened to ship. And it just wasn't very flexible. So what we wanted to do with Bedrock was actually move all the assets, including all the concrete5 dependencies like jQuery, jQuery UI, Bootstrap 4, for both themes and for things like the CMS, like the toolbar, actual stuff like editing images and things like that. We wanted to move them into their own NPM project and include them as though they were a dependency. So concrete5 Bedrock is actually its own GitHub project. And you can see it here. It's basically, the file system should look pretty, it should be pretty easy to traverse, at least understand at a certain level where things are. For example, all of the CMS assets are grouped within CMS here. There's JS and Sass here. And you'll see things like file manager and panels and search and all that stuff. And then we have things that belong more to the front end domain. So stuff like boards is the new feature in version 9, calendar, like I was talking about here, and all these files here. And finally, we have Bedrock up here, which is responsible for including all the stuff that you would need as a theme developer to take advantage of this sort of underlying theme framework. So that's kind of how the repository looks at a glance. And this is how the elemental theme takes advantage of it. So if I look into, and what's nice about this is since this is a separate NPM package, you can install it in your own package development environment to make your own themes. So to use the asset Bedrock in your actual theme, you would install a library called Laravel Mix, which is really just a nice wrapper around Webpack, which many of you probably have had some experience with. And then you include the concrete CMS / Bedrock repository, and then you can include that in your theme. So if I head into themes, elemental, wrong place. Themes, elemental, SCSS, main.scss. This is how the style sheet looks for the entire main CSS file in my elemental theme. So you'll notice at the very top, now that I've installed Bedrock in my theme development environment, I just import this with this one line. I can import the entire system for my theme. So this front end include takes care of installing Bootstrap 4, a whole bunch of concrete5, or a whole bunch of sort of any kind of concrete5 theme framework stuff that we have. Really, at this point, it's mostly Bootstrap 4. But in the future, that may change. We may get more. We may have our own components that the core that they fall outside of Bootstrap 4. And then finally, we include in our theme itself actual features of concrete5. So you'll notice here, for example, I've got features calendar. If I open my Sass file for that, you can see I'm including the Bedrock calendar CSS, which means I can take advantage of the sort of very basic default functionality of the calendar front end, and then I can include some customizations, and this is just Sass that I'm including. And then at that point, I know that my theme has full support for the calendar front end CSS because I've taken care of actually including it through Sass, and I can mark that in my themes page theme class as having support for that. So this is kind of the last piece of this puzzle. You can see that the elemental page theme class, which if any of you have done concrete5 theme development, you probably have some experience with this. There is a new method here called get theme supported features. And you basically tell concrete5 what features your theme supports. And again, this is all stuff you have to opt into. Everything should continue to work as it has. It basically says, hey, I've got support for the calendar, so I don't need you to include that calendar fallback JavaScript or CSS because it's included in my theme. And what this lets you do is, since you control that implementation fully, you could swap out the JavaScript and the CSS for the calendar entirely. And as long as your implementation of JavaScript and CSS works with the data that the calendar block gives you, you don't have to include full calendar IO. You don't have to go through any hacks to say, hey, I don't want full calendar IO. And the nice thing about this is it frees up the core so that we're no longer hard coding assets like full calendar. So in the future, if the core calendar block implementation switches to use some different library, we don't have this asset lying around people's code called full calendar that doesn't mean anything anymore because we don't actually use it in the core. So we've kind of abstracted the idea of features of a site away from the actual way that we display those, in giving users the ability to, or giving theme developers the ability to kind of opt into the core style sheets or opt out of them, basically. And so, with just this one line of code at the top, and then you could have a site that runs Bootstrap 4 that works with all those core components, and then you're free to kind of customize them as you see fit. And I think that's probably a good enough place for me to stop, and we can take questions on this too. But that's kind of I don't want to. That already is a pretty big intro. But yeah, if I was going to leave you with anything, I would, other than the fact that we're super excited about it, we've split out all of our JavaScript and CSS dependencies into a separate library, into a separate package, which I think will let us much more efficiently work on those things without having to have everything tied up into concrete5. And I think it's going to lead to a lot more flexibility, and it's going to make life, once you kind of figure out the workflow around it, it's going to make theme development and UI development in concrete5 much nicer to work on.
Nice. Yeah, thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thank you.
There's also a documentation page about this in our docs that people can read and understand.
Yes, we actually, as part of this, we've posted a couple different tutorials in the docs site, and I think there might be one in the appendix section of the docs, the developer documentation as well, for specifically how to work on pull requests that touch both Bedrock and the core, because the negative with this is that it's more complexity for us to manage version releases, but also for developers to, if you wanted to fix a CSS tweak in Elemental, you'd probably Elemental is all the themes are still in the concrete5 core. If you wanted a CSS tweak for the toolbar, you could open the concrete5 repository and open a pull request. Now you potentially have to open 2 pull requests, and so that's we've tried to already offer a fair amount of documentation on how to do exactly that, because we know it's going to be there's a learning curve there.
Yeah, but this is a good time, especially if you're a theme developer and you're thinking, how is this going to impact the themes that I have in the marketplace? What can I do? How's this going to work? We'd love to be working with you and have your input now of, hey, it'd be easier if you did it this way or that way. Because
yeah, for sure.
still being still happening real time. So
Yes.
We do have a couple questions on that. So the first one,
Not surprising.
the first one is, what about the style customizer? Are we going to implement SAS compatibility with that for version 9?
It's a great question, and we don't have a great answer for it today. What would we say about the? I mean, this is one of the biggest hurdles. I know that that PHP SAS has come a long way in the last few years since we last took a look at it. I don't think it was feasible at all a few years ago. I don't know if that's changed. There are libraries for it, but I certainly haven't tested them.
Well, one thing I'd say, typically with that style customizer, we would recommend that you use that as sparingly as possible. Really only use the style customizer for little bits of things like, so you're applying a font color to the body or something like that. We don't really recommend that you would use that style customizer for your entire theme. So, you can still kind of use it as is with less and still be able to use its functionality. I know that CSS, I don't know if it's version 3 or more modern than that, but I know CSS now supports variables, which are honestly a better way to do what we're trying to do with style customizer. So I think there might be opportunity for that. Maybe
this is the last. Yeah, those are good responses. This is the last sort of big hurdle with this, and definitely the last big unknown. It's still, there's an open issue for this in that V9 repository, and it's quite possible that once we have a public beta of this, there may not be style customization in that open beta. It is something that we want to do. Another thing, honestly, the customizer, everyone understands the problem we're trying to solve and thinks that it's important, but I'm not sure that the current implementation of the customizer, at least how it's demoed, or at least how it's implemented in the core, or how it's implemented in Elemental, actually delivers on that promise 100%. There's something about it that, I don't know. I think it's telling that for one of our sites, when we wanted to actually have a few different sites built off the same shared theme using different variables in it, we implemented a custom solution that was, not because the customizer doesn't work, but because we were too scared to run the customizations off the customizer, knowing that an admin could tweak it. So that, that could be a matter of tightening permissions around it, or a matter of just changing the way those customizations are applied. But I think that more, the discussions around that are ongoing, and we haven't ruled anything out in terms of how we might implement the customization in version 9.
I definitely agree with most of that. I mean, I don't know if I'd agree that we wouldn't recommend applying it to the whole site for some technical reason. I mean, I think that works fine.
It works.
I definitely agree with it. Yeah, go ahead.
It takes several seconds to compile a less file with Java or with PHP, even if it's simple. So the more complexity you add there, if we tried to compile Bootstrap with the less version of Bootstrap with it, it would take 5 seconds to render the page. So you can do it if you're caching and smart about it, but it's definitely better to use sparingly.
Yeah. There's a lot of cruft in it. It definitely feels like a feature that is really geared towards kind of the DIY entry aspect of kind of who uses concrete5. If you're an agency or a web builder, I imagine most of the people watching this are, you're probably not using that as kind of a tool in your suite. Just like Andy mentioned, we literally have a site that is the same exact theme but in 4 different colors, and we're yeah, we're not using this. There's something
embarrassing,
missing,
honestly. Yeah.
That's not great. We've missed the mark a little bit. It almost feels like it's too granular. You get this huge list of here's everything that you can change, but there's not. It's a strange user experience. That being said, I know some people use it and quite happily, grab a theme out of the marketplace, change the background colors, and stick a logo in the corner and go make money or spread their message to the world. So I don't think it's something we want to just throw out.
No,
but it's not
it
not
exists for a
central to our
reason.
concern.
Yeah.
Kind of along those same lines, I'm skipping a couple. The questions are coming in this week.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So I'm skipping a couple to go to one that is kind of along the same vein. Dimger is asking us, would we ever support loading in SAS directly with the require asset? I think the answer to this is definitely no.
Yeah, I don't think so. There was a pull request a while back that I think we closed due to someone, I think, not understanding how things were going to be structured. Like, they wanted to be able to load stuff from the node modules directory with the asset. And I would say we're moving, honestly, away from require asset as much as possible. Not away from the promise of what it was supposed to do, which is make sure that the right CSS and JavaScript gets loaded at the right time. But I think it's more likely that you're going to see methods where you're going to see much less of that throughout the core and much more of like customized entry points based on the type of stuff that you're trying to do. So, when in version 8, there's a require asset call that loads, 10 or 11 different JavaScripts and CSS files when the toolbar loads, because we tried to keep them as granular as possible. And now at this point in version 9, there's a single one that loads just the it's cms.css and cms.js when the toolbar loads, because really, and then, there are the require assets still gonna function as is, but I think it's more likely that you're gonna have processes that kind of take that, having to micromanage what assets get loaded, and it's going to be moved up to the theme level. I would say, for a lot of these things, at least.
Yeah, and definitely, along the same lines of the less compiler, one of the biggest issues with what we're trying to do with the style customizer and what we would have to do if we were going to do require asset is, PHP is not the right tool to use these days for compiling these things. And you'll see that with what Andy's talking about with Bedrock. We're using npm and Node to compile these things, and the reason why is because Node has a whole ecosystem of these different compilers that all are well built and work completely. Whereas PHP's ecosystem in terms of compilers is really, really light, and it's just not meant to be used that way. So definitely, like, as we move forward, we're moving towards using Node to compile these things, and then having, like Andy is saying, with the cms.css file, having more bigger files that have in piecemeal included the things that they need using Webpack, and loading those automatically using the tools. So
yeah, it's just that, these are tools that a lot of web developers in the last years, they're comfortable with these tools like Laravel Mix and Webpack and things like that. And we cannot execute as well at making sure that SAS renders to 100% fidelity like these other projects can, and that's not our strong suit. So we already use Laravel Mix for our own themes, so it made a lot of sense for us to move our assets into npm, because then it lets us, all the other assets that we depend upon are also in npm. So one nice part of Bedrock is you won't see any third-party vendor stuff in there like jQuery, jQuery UI, because it's all, it is in there, but it's all being included from the third-party dependencies themselves. So jQuery, jQuery UI, those are all being brought in with npm from their own repositories, which means it's going to be a lot easier to keep stuff up to date, and just using the right tools for the job.
And that leads into the next question from Stu Black. When you override a style sheet or JavaScript in the concrete5 core, today he asks, do you have to name the file the same thing as it is in the core? Today, absolutely. So you could, today with the current version of concrete5, you can override jQuery.js just by making a file at application.js, jQuery.js. But that's not going to be the case moving forward, is it, Andy?
Probably. I don't imagine it changing, just because why would we touch systems that we don't need to touch? But again, that's sort of like, that was a type of approach that we thought was quite novel when Concrete first came out, and it's been that way since Concrete 5 was version 1, or at least Concrete 5 was open sourced 12 years ago. But it is definitely like a blunt hammer. Like, I don't know that we would recommend upgrading jQuery in that way. I mean, if you have to, if you're trying to pass a compliance review and your jQuery is just out of date and you need to have a new one loaded, like that will do the trick. But it's definitely, it could have lots of unintended consequences for something that big. But yes, in general, the application directory will override CSS and JS files, and I imagine would continue to do so.
I know Laravel Mix has the ability to like separate those vendor files. So there's some way where you can have it compile where you would still, even if you're using Webpack to include jQuery, you'd still end up with a jQuery.js file somehow. So maybe, specifically that example of jQuery, I would expect that would go away unless we can find a way to compile it externally like that, right? Since it'll just be included with Webpack.
Oh, I mean, well, jQuery is a special case. Same with another one. I think Font Awesome is the same way. Like, we are actually including those as external assets still. They are actually still, they are loaded in as their own. They're not included in our builds. They're included as their own extent. Yeah, and then we print them as externals. And I think that was done for backward compatibility, and the fact that if we just yank jQuery out of the core, we will hear about it. I mean, it won't be gone from all the actual build files, but yeah, the concrete/js/jQuery.js is still in the core and will continue to be so at least until version 10.
Okay. Next question. Where did that go? How are we going to handle updates to Bootstrap over time?
I think with a lot more frequency than we do today. I mean, Bootstrap updating major versions is always a bear. And so I don't imagine, Bootstrap 5. I think their timing is right. It's funny. We always seem to adopt at the tail end, which, I mean, for a framework that's meant to be used to build real things, I think that's fair, because it takes Bootstrap about a year to shake out the kinks, much like it probably takes us a few release cycles after a major update to get out the kinks that we introduced in the major update. So, but I do think that with everything coming in through NPM, I would expect us to be updating Bootstrap to point releases much, much more frequently than we do today, because it's as simple as just updating the dependency as opposed to copying in new files and merging in changes and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't expect to go to Bootstrap 5 in a point release, so that will be in version 10, or that will be evaluated at that point. Yeah.
And it looks like the last one we have in the list is from John the Fish. I'm not sure if this is specific or just in general. His question is, will there be any changes to the way permissions work? Firstly, from the perspective of an admin, and secondly, from the perspective of a developer implementing them.
I don't think that we have anything planned, but it's one of those things where if we had good reason to, we'd always take a look at what people that deficiencies, or certainly if there are permissions related bugs, we want to know about them. I know that there are a bunch that are already reported in GitHub that are less about the whole permission system and more about sort of specific ways that the permission system might do weird stuff under certain conditions. So we certainly want to know about those. If there are thoughts around how the permissions could be better utilized or more effective or easier to apply, that's certainly there's definitely room for that there, but I don't know that we have some grand plan to do that we're just not sharing. I think we're just kind of we know that there are things that we could do, but I think getting some feedback in that regard would be valuable.
That one strikes me as a tremendous opportunity for more documentation too. I mean, permissions are so complicated, and our docs, they cover it, but yeah, there's that kind of huge disconnect between, well, this is what they do technically, and kind of, well, how do I use that to solve real problems? And,
yeah, like, you
I know
know,
I
the
find
use
it confusing
cases.
at times. Yeah.
Yeah, the use cases are not infinite. And you know, and so the idea that like, well, how could I describe permissions that you could do anything with them? It's like, yeah, but there's at least like there's a half a dozen things that people have to do over and over and over. Like, I need to grant a subgroup access to the file manager. It's like, well, good luck. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not even
Some of the
really that
greatest hits, docs. Yeah.
yeah, like it's really just, you know, it's you have to do these four things. And so when you actually write them down, it's like super approachable and they make sense. But when you have to remember all those things just off the top of your head, it's like it's not easy. So I agree that that is something that we want to get into the docs in a more for that kind of editor level documentation that we have at the kind of reference level where we kind of describe things at the ant level, but we want to describe things more at the like, you know, at a higher level.
Kind of how-tos. I see that. You know, the other thing that I see that we could do, we've started using the Atlassian ecosystem for running our shop really aggressively because of all the compliance stuff that we do. So I've spent a lot of time in Jira, and that's an interesting experience because it feels very similar to Concrete in some ways, where it's just like you're underneath this hood, and there's workflows, there's workflow schemes, there's workflow scheme screens, and you're just like, dude, oh my gosh, like there's so much happening. I just want to add a step to this workflow. Please help me. And you recognize as you're using it, oh, this is a super powerful tool. I mean, clearly, Atlassian's making lots of money. They're doing really well. Everyone uses them. So you know that like I've got to be able to achieve what I want here, but sometimes the answer feels just out of reach. And some of what they have started doing in their interface to kind of mitigate that is just kind of embedding quick links to what you probably need to be at from where you are having the problem. All right. So, you'll be in a project and trying to change workflow, and they'll have they've added a little link to the corner. Like, if you want to change the workflow screen scheme for this system, you want to click here and it'll take you right to that page in settings. And so that, to a developer, that's kind of like, well, that's stupid. Like, why wouldn't you just go there? But like to the rest of us business users, it's like, I'm so lost. Please just give me a signpost to the right spot. So I can see us doing some more of that. Like if there's kind of, greatest hits problems that, like I know we've got a couple of dashboard pages where we've buried permissions that are actually super important, and those could probably be better organized or cross-linked and have some inline help stuff to it. So that's kind of in addition to putting together some better how-tos to achieve common goals. We could do some better hot linking between stuff, and that might provide some real value.
I agree.
And I think it's worth saying, from an admin experience, it will be changing at least a little bit, because those interfaces and the modals and all kinds of all the buttons will be using the new design and stuff like that. So from an admin interface, like the flow will probably be the same, but the interface will look different. Sounds like he is focused more on stability because he's working on an integration with permissions right now. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is that it's going to be completely stable, and you shouldn't have to worry about changes to the design.
Yeah, there's no big thing
from an API perspective, we're not touching it at all.
No, it does more than we need.
Other than the community agreeing that Jira's settings are awful and hard to use, I think we've gone through all the questions.
Cool.
So
it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, and to Atlassian's credit, it'll do what you want. Like, once you figure it out, it's pretty cool. But man, it's definitely given both Andy and me a few moments of, oh, I'm so sorry for everything that we've done to the people who use Concrete, because this has got to be what it feels like. So it's been illuminating.
Yeah,
awesome.
It does feel like that. Yep.
Well, I guess that's that for this month. We're gonna meet again in a month on when, Corbin?
Cinco de Mayo.
Yep. So that'll be exciting. It'll be too early for a margarita, but
we'll see.
I'll be looking ahead. So yeah, that's what we got. Thank you, everybody who filled out that questionnaire. Congratulations to our winners. We're going to do it again soon. So those of you who didn't win this time, you might win next time. And that's what we know. So Thanks.
I thank you.
Thanks, everybody.